Fat Horse Audiobooks. Reading crap so you don't have to.
Fat Horse Audiobooks present American Crisis: Leadership Lessons from the COVID-19 Pandemic by me, Andrew Cuomo. Introduction. I normally don't turn off my cell phone when I sleep, because the work of being governor is literally 24 hours a day, and the phone pings all night long. If I'm really tired, I'll turn it off, but that doesn't mean people can't get me. It's just harder. My office phone is always answered, at night by a New York State trooper. Callers must convince the trooper that the issue is really important. Some troopers are easier to convince than others. Some troopers decide that it's safer to put all callers through, but as I joke to my team, these troopers learn quickly that it's not in fact safer when they are then assigned to different duties. When my cell phone rang late on March 1, I hadn't turned it off, but I didn't get to it in time. Moments later, the landline rang. It was Melissa DeRosa, secretary to the governor and my top aide. Brilliant, tough, indefatigable, and widely respected. She is the quarterback on my team and is responsible for managing all the pieces. Governor, I'm sorry to stalk you with multiple calls, but we just received a confirmation from Wadsworth. This was the New York State Department of Health's lab in Albany. New York has its first case of coronavirus. Oh, a healthcare worker who just returned to New York City from Iran. We believe the incident is isolated. I have Dr. Zuka on the other line. Can I conference him in? Please, put him through, I said. As the state health commissioner, Dr. Howard Zuka began to run through the patient's background, symptoms, and literal steps taken between landing at JFK Airport and reaching her apartment in Manhattan. It seems as though white noise washed over the line. I couldn't prove it, but I knew this wasn't New York's first coronavirus case, and I knew the country was not prepared. The good news that night was that this was a fairly straightforward case, which would hopefully not cause great public alarm. The 39-year-old woman had traveled to Iran to provide health services and returned to New York feeling ill, but she knew to take precautions and did not come in contact with many people. She had been traveling with a male partner and had worn a mask. She took an Uber from the airport to her apartment and then called ahead to the hospital to make arrangements to be tested. In many ways, it was the best case scenario, an informed healthcare worker who did the right thing. However, even this single case in the state of New York presented complications and foreshadowed what was to come. What flight did she take? Could she have infected people on the plane? Who was responsible for contacting all the passengers on the flight? How about the Uber driver? Were there proper precautions taken at the hospital? These were the operational issues that we would need to figure out and standardize quickly, and they were mind-boggling when we considered the volume of cases we could anticipate given what we were already knew about the virus. A few weeks later, we had received the first taste of what was to come. On February 6, I was sitting at my desk in New York City, office at 633 3rd Avenue in Manhattan, working on a speech. My director of administration, Stephanie Benton, came in because I had an important call. Stephanie organizes the Executive Chamber operations and has been with me since I started as Attorney General 14 years ago. She can juggle 10 balls at a time and always does it with a smile, a bada bing. I'm fully aware that my ability to function and get things done is dependent on Stephanie and a strong team around her. On the phone line was Rick Cotton, the executive director of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, a powerful agency that operates bridges, tunnels, and airports, as well as the Port of New York. Rick called me to tell me that Federal Department of Health and Human Services, the HHS officials, had contacted him about passengers on a cruise ship nearby who they believed were positive for COVID-19. HHS wanted to dock the ship at a Port Authority facility and New York to take charge of the patients. The novel coronavirus, formerly the Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome Coronavirus 2, SARS-CoV-2, which was the virus that causes the disease we've come to know as COVID-19, was at that time thought to be largely contained in China, with a few scattered cases in Washington and California. But this was the first time and the first case that would come knocking on New York's door. When the call came in, the Ebola crisis from years earlier flashed in my mind. How we handled it, what went right, what went wrong. In 2014, a healthcare worker who'd been helping out with an Ebola outbreak in Africa returned to New York after having contracted the disease. He rode the subway, ate in a restaurant, and visited a bowling alley before he knew he was sick. People got scared. Governor Chris Christie of New Jersey and I held a joint press conference / Bon Jovi concert because we shared control of the Port Authority to announce a policy to screen people at the airports and, if necessary, quarantine them. When another healthcare worker arrived at Newark Airport, also returning from Africa, airport officials ordered the woman held in quarantine in a tent at the airport, where she was given nothing more than granola bars and a cell phone, which she quickly used to call CNN. We hadn't forgotten the pitfalls of forced quarantine. As would happen again and again over the course of this emergency, dozens of questions flooded my thoughts. What if the patients said they wanted to leave? What was the Department of Health's authority to hold them? If patients agreed to come with us, where should we bring them? Do they need a hospital? Do the hospital and medical staff need to take special precautions? If we are quarantining them in a hotel, do we have legal authority to force them to stay? Can they leave the hotel room at all? How did they get meals? Can housekeeping staff enter the room? What medical assistance do they need? How long will they be sick? The questions were obvious, and the answers were few. HHS was alarmingly ignorant. In the end, the ship docked in Bayonne, New Jersey, and the 4 passengers who were transferred to a hospital for further evaluation tested negative. But the situation gave me the first true sense that we were on a journey to a place we had never been before. I sat back and wondered, how did the great United States of America get to this point? When COVID first hit, it was inconceivable to me that the federal government would abandon its basic role of managing a federal emergency. But that is exactly what would happen as soon as they understood the depth of the problem, the complexity of the solution, and the political pain that needed to be endured in the upcoming weeks and months. Before the extent of the crisis was revealed, the federal government initially sought control. The Center for Disease Control, CDC, and the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, were very possessive of the initial testing strategy, deciding who should be tested, when they should be tested, when states should receive the results, and who should be screened at airports and how. Making the bureaucratic nightmare worse, every single test was routed to a single lab in Atlanta, a lab that by the middle of February had already been known to return faulty results. It was clear that building out testing operations would be clear to controlling the spread not just in New York, but in the whole country. You didn't have to spend a lifetime in government to know the system in place was set up for failure. Given the constant irrationality of the Trump administration, why would anyone think this federal government would act responsibly or competently? I had deep philosophical differences with Trump before COVID began. I believed he was a salesman who adopted hyper-conservative positions to win as a Republican. I knew Trump from earlier days in New York and was aware of his lifestyle. He was anything but hyper-conservative. Trump had no government experience when he took office, and he was rarely involved in substantive policy once he did. Most qualified professionals in the Trump administration came and left before their dinner got cold. Trump, from all evidence, believed the pandemic was just another public relations matter. In February, before the first COVID case came to New York, I had already been tied up in my latest fight with the president. A very public, very ugly battle with the administration over the Trusted Traveler program, otherwise known as Global Entry. The program allowed high-volume travelers with the convenience of skipping long lines at customs. As part of his election year strategy focusing on deportation and immigration, Trump had his Department of Homeland Security, DHS, ban New York State residents from participating in the program. It was a blatant act of retaliation for a state law I had signed the previous year allowing undocumented immigrants to receive driver's licenses while shielding applicants' information from immigration enforcement agencies. While public health shouldn't be a political issue, with the Trump administration, everything was political. In retrospect, how ironic was it that the White House, which was initially so controlling, would soon run from the entire situation. In any event, I was already frustrated with their inability to make simple, timely decisions about testing procedures and protocols. It was around this time that President Trump announced that Vice President Pence would head the White House Coronavirus Task Force. The Pence appointment was criticized not only because Trump made it, but also because Vice President Pence, the former governor of Indiana, had been very slow to address or acknowledge the HIV crisis. Another criticism was that his appointment would politicize the task force when it would be better left to health professionals and substantive cabinet secretaries. On this I disagreed. I was a former cabinet secretary and have great respect for the position. They were weighty officers, no doubt, confirmed by U.S. Senate. They carry lifetime titles and are in line of succession for the presidency. As Housing and Urban Development, HUD Secretary, I was 13th in the line of succession. If there were 12 simultaneous heart attacks, I would have been President of the United States. However, the COVID effort was going to be administration-wide, and the Vice President was in a much better position to command control over the entirety of the federal government. I publicly supported the President's appointment of Pence. I thought it was a positive sign that the President was putting his senior official in charge. I was wrong. I would be wrong many times throughout the crisis. We were in a new moment in politics and government. There was no delay in communication. Everything was instantaneous. There were no letters or emissaries sent. I would do several media events per day. My words would immediately reach the White House, which would often immediately respond. Social media changed into governmental dialogue. I was direct to camera, supporting Pence, and the White House would see it immediately. The White House was obviously appreciative of my position on Pence. The last week of February, the Vice President and I spoke, and we discussed the testing logjam. As a former governor, he understood the situation. He was also clearly navigating his federal authority for the first time. The Vice President has no specific portfolio, and no heads could always pose a problem because they have ultimate constitutional legal authority. We needed Pence to intervene with the FDA to expedite the approval for New York to run our own COVID test. To my pleasant surprise, he did, and the FDA approved New York's testing in its own laboratory. As it turned out, that moment would change history. With the FDA approval, we could finally test for COVID in New York State, instead of shipping specimens to Atlanta one at a time. New York State had cut out the middleman. Just in time for the call I was about to receive that Sunday night, confirming what in my gut I already knew. Coronavirus had reached New York. So much was unknown. In some ways I was not prepared for the moment, because no one could be truly prepared for the moment. In other ways, I have spent my whole life preparing for it. I have a healthy cynicism about people in general and an unhealthy cynicism about politics and government in particular. But understanding people's experiences, motivations, and biases is always starting point for me in judging what they have to say. So let me explain mine. I'm 62 years old, and life has taken me up and down all around. I grew up in New York City as an outer borough middle-class guy. I paid my way through school with every odd job imaginable. Landscaper, night shift security guard, mechanic, ice cream scooper, tow truck driver, and construction worker. I've been the campaign manager, started a non-profit to help the homeless, served as an assistant DA, practiced law privately, worked in real estate finance. I was a federal cabinet secretary, state attorney general, and now I'm governor. I've loved and lost. I've lived through an embarrassing and very public divorce splashed across the front pages of the tabloids. I've suffered the pain and feeling I failed my children. I was publicly humiliated by losing campaigns and was declared a political dead man. I suffered through my father's crushing political downfall and shared his grief and recriminations afterward. I know my strengths and weaknesses. I want to get things done and be judged by results and by making a positive difference, and I can be obsessive in that pursuit. I have disdain for the shallowness and duplicity of political theater and no longer want to hold my tongue. I do not suffer fools gladly, gracefully, or patiently. I'm an overprotective parent, and it frustrates and embarrasses my daughters. My natural instinct is to be aggressive, and it doesn't always serve me well. I'm a controlling personality. At one time I opposed that characterization because it has a negative implication. But you know me as a person who is not controlling, and I'll show you a person who is probably not highly successful. I don't have what you call a balanced life either. I work all the time. Enjoyment for me is when I'm with my daughters or my family, and in the summer I spend time on the water with my brother and friends. But usually I just work. Being governor is a job that's never really done. If I'm not working, I always feel a tinge of guilt. The wheels in my mind never stop turning. So at night I think about the things I need to do the next day or go through the events of the day that just ended. I inherited this proclivity from my father, who was an even worse workaholic. When someone would suggest to my father to take a vacation, he loved to say, "Why should I unwind? I will just have to wind myself up again." Then he'd laugh. Ha! But living with a workaholic could really be boring. I'm a progressive Democrat, as that term used to be defined. I'm frustrated by the incompetence of the government and distrustful of the motivations and ability of many politicians. I was raised at a kitchen table when my father talked about improving society and the teachings of Matthew 25 and Tikkun Olam. Building community, dedicated to doing justice and improving life for all. I deeply believe government is the best vehicle to advance that mission, and that government service done well is an art form. But I also believe government service is a dying art, and too many seek office who do not possess the skills or knowledge necessary to actually make change or are motivated by personal rather than public advancement. I spent 8 years in Washington, and I have no desire to go back. There have been rumors during this crisis and before that I was interested in running for president. That is a natural suspicion. After all, Grover Cleveland and both presidents, Roosevelt, FDR, and Theodore, were governors in New York. My father, Mario Cuomo, talked about running for president, although he never did. But I have been definitive in my support of Joe Biden for president, and he is also a personal friend. But facts never get in the way of a good rumor. I've worked with presidents, cabinet secretaries, governors, and world leaders, attended many meetings in the Oval Office. The Oval Office! Worked to pass many bills through Congress. Was confirmed twice by the U.S. Senate. I fought for and alongside underserved communities, reduced discrimination against the LGBTQ community, sued the KKK community, increased federal aid to Indian reservations, rebuilt public housing across the country, designed a new model to help the homeless, served during national emergencies and disasters. As HUD secretary, worked in every state in the nation, and represented this nation in countries around the globe. As governor for the past 10 years, I've worked with Democrats and Republicans. I reformed the bureaucracy of government. I reduced taxes, passed nation-leading progressive legislation from gun control to marriage equality, and from codifying a woman's right to choose into instituting the highest minimum wage at the time, free college tuition, and the nation's most aggressive environmental program. My administration has completed more major infrastructure projects than any other modern history. I have an advantage in my position. I have nothing left to prove to anyone and find the plain truth liberating. This is my second life. I lived and died a political death before my eventual rebirth. I ran for governor in 2002 and lost. Before that, my father had lost his re-election in 1994 after 3 terms as governor. My father and I spent many evenings sitting on the couch, watching a ball game, drinking a bottle of vino, and replaying the game tapes of our government careers, reviewing what we did right, what we did wrong. The advantage of retrospection is priceless, as well as painful. Over time, the petty day-to-day political pressures become irrelevant, and only the lasting contributions remain. Our shared conclusion was that if we could somehow replay the game, we would play it much differently. My father and I agreed we would be bolder, take more risks, make more change, and make more progress by proving to the people that government can be effective and can actually make a positive difference. We lamented the time wasted catering to this official or that official, the lost opportunities of an overly cautious legislature, the frustration of bureaucracy that didn't move fast enough to produce real results for people. If we could do it over and over again, we would get even more done, and those accomplishments would then build more support for government. After all those nights on the couch, in 2006 I was reborn when I won the election for Attorney General of New York. Dead politicians don't usually come back to life, and I had a second chance. And I would do it right this time. As I called my father onto stage that election night and held his hand high, I pledged that I would do right for myself and for my father. The political pundits get to write the eulogy once you're out of office, and my father's political eulogy was essentially that he gave great speeches, but this government didn't produce major successes. In my father's case, the Albany reporter he respected the least wound up writing his actual eulogy for the New York Times. There's no justice. It was very unfair, as well as unkind. It was also untrue. But welcome to politics in New York. My father was interested in the articulation of government principles, but not to the exclusion of government implementation. I'm committed to highlight both. I want a government that talks the talk and walks the walk. A government of principle that can also produce and improve people's day-to-day lives. I intend to serve as governor of New York as long as the people will have me. My daughters are grown. Their education is paid for. And I can pay for their 3 weddings. After I'm done as governor, I want to help my children in any way I can, but also buy a boat and go fishing. But for now, I have 19.5 million people counting on me. That is my priority. At the beginning of this crisis, I thought of FDR's words. Courage is not in the absence of fear, but rather the assessment that something else is more important than fear. There might be no good outcome, but I knew I could not live with myself if I stayed in this foxhole. The right thing to do in the coming battle was to step up and give it my all. There could be no ambivalence. Total commitment is always the first step. Most Americans go to sleep at night thinking that the government is keeping this nation safe, that, God forbid, if a terrible disaster emerged, some authority with men and women in uniforms and equipment will show up to save the day. Sometimes that is not enough. I have been through hurricanes, floods, fires, and earthquakes. I know how fragile our social foundation really is. I have seen people panic and trample on one another. I have seen civilization degrade when the instinct of self-survival takes over. An airborne virus was one of the nightmare scenarios envisioned as a terrorist plot. It is easy to create chaos and overwhelm society with fear when people are afraid to breathe the air. There will be no good news with this virus and no good outcome. Schools and businesses will be closed. The economy would suffer. People would die. nothing we could do would be enough. There would be no possibility for victory, and even FDR and Churchill had at least the possibility of a successful outcome. I knew this country was in trouble when COVID hit. It was divided and vulnerable, making it weak. A serious threat that was inevitable. And when it came, we did not have the capacity to handle it. The only way to defeat the virus is for a united societal response, where we can all agree to protect one another. But the coronavirus is attacking us at an unprecedented time of partisanship and internal discord. Political, racial, economic, and geographic divisions are at an all-time high. The nation is more divided than at any time since the Civil War. The unity this nation has shown in the past, when it was under attack, such as World War II, is nowhere to be seen. When we are united, we are undefeatable. When we are divided, we are vulnerable. Our ability to respond together as a society is dependent on the strength and the capacity of our government. Government is nothing more than the vehicle for collective action. Washington, Lincoln, FDR, JFK. These were great men, made for the moment, although moments made these men great. At this moment in time, this nation is led by neither a great government nor a great leader. Still, there is reason for hope. In this crisis, we see evidence that the virus can be defeated. New York State, a microcosm of the nation, has shown a path forward. We have seen government mobilize to handle a crisis. We have seen Americans come together in a sense of unity to do the impossible. We have seen how the virus is confronted and defeated. New York didn't do everything right, but there are lessons we can learn that will lead to victory.